In the 2 weeks since the Supreme Court decision that overturned Roe versus Wade, abortion rights advocates have been demanding action, especially from D.C., to protect those rights. And on Friday, President Biden signed an executive order that he says will protect some access to abortion.
I want to talk about an executive order I'm signing to protect reproductive rights of women. In the aftermath of the Supreme Court's terrible, extreme, and I think so totally wrong-headed decision to overturn Roe v. Wade, we cannot allow an out-of-control Supreme Court working in conjunction with extremist elements of the Republican Party to take away freedoms and our personal autonomy. The choice we face as a nation between the mainstream and the extreme, between moving forward and moving backwards, between allowing politicians to enter the most personal parts of our lives and protecting the right of privacy. Yes, embedded in our Constitution.
The executive order aims to safeguard access to abortion services and contraception, protect health information, and protect the safety of patients, providers, and clinics. It asks the Federal Trade Commissioner to consider taking steps to protect consumers' privacy when seeking information about reproductive health, and creates an interagency task force in which the Attorney General would provide technical assistance to states that give legal protections to out-of-state patients and providers who offer legal services. But the president himself has admitted that he can only do so much via executive order, and that the only way to secure a woman's right to choose is for Congress to restore the protections of Roe as federal law. And with states enacting new anti-abortion laws at rapid and alarming rates, it is unclear how much Biden's order will actually protect reproductive rights in certain states. Kansas, for example, is planning to vote in August on an amendment to the state constitution saying it does not guarantee a right to abortions. And Thursday night in Pennsylvania, state Senate Republicans changed the rules to advance their own late-night proposal to amend the state constitution, saying abortion rights are also not guaranteed. So how can Biden's executive order stand up to these state-level challenges? Joining me now to discuss this and more, Mini Timaraju, the president of NARAL Pro-Choice America, and Maria Teresa Kumar, the president and CEO of Voto Latino and an MSNBC political analyst. It's great to have both of you with us. Mini, I'd like to start with you. Your reaction to President Biden's actions today, and what more do you want to see him and his administration do?
You know, as you pointed out, advocates have been pushing hard, and we've been meeting with the administration, honestly, since the court took up the Dobbs case. I think today was a really strong start. We do expect more, and we hope to see more in coming weeks. But having an executive order that directs agencies and really takes a whole of government approach to tackling what they can tackle, what they have authority to tackle, is a great start. The FTC piece on privacy and disinformation is really going to be critical, and it's new. And with this FTC chair and commission, I think we can see some big, bold things happen. And really having the DOJ lean in on legal protections is going to be critical. So we are encouraged. And we look forward to more.
Maria Teresa, Biden again encouraged Americans to go vote in November. That has been his rallying cry in terms of how to respond to what the Supreme Court did. Take a listen to this.
We need 2 additional pro-choice senators and a pro-choice House to codify Roe as federal law. Your vote can make that a reality. Fastest way to restore Roe is to pass a national law codifying Roe, which I will sign immediately upon its passage at my desk.
Is putting those numbers out there a good way to animate voters, or is it a little bit misleading? I mean, just 2 more senators and keeping the House. And how challenging is it that when those senators would likely have to flip red seats? If we take for granted, that the current 50 Democratic seats remain plus 2, is it more about being pro-choice, or is it more about being anti-filibuster?
So I'm glad you asked this question, because believe it or not, there are pathways for the Senate, but whether or not the Democrats can keep Congress, the House of Representatives, that is going to be more challenging. When you ask what he's referring to, where would these senators come from? Fetterman in Pennsylvania is very strong. He's actually up in the polls. Warnock actually seems to be very formidable in Georgia, so it looks like he's going to remain even in that special election. Ohio seems to be also a pathway that a lot of the Democrats strategists are looking at. And believe it or not, North Carolina now is a toss-up. So there are pathways, but I think the challenge is the codification also has to happen in the House of Representatives, and that's a far leap. I think what the president's trying to communicate is that in 2020, a majority of Americans came out and overthrew what would be a fascist regime. I say that not lightly, but what we're learning from the January 6th attempted coup by the former president. And he's reminding people what they were able to do in the midterms of 2018, which was the largest people going to the ballot and voting in 100 years during a midterm election. So he's saying, look, there are pathways to codify this, but the work remains. I do think, though, what is the most important piece of what happened today was that he used his pen to communicate to the American people what his values are, where he lies on abortion. And that has been the hardest thing for the administration to demonstrate. What are his wins and what does he stand for? So the more that we could see the president using his pen when it comes to climate reform, gun reform, talking about immigration, making it the court's problem, it allows him to communicate to Americans where their values are and remind them why they voted for him.
Minnie, in the meantime, we are seeing this state-level Republican effort to ban abortion and add bans to state constitutions, like I mentioned in Pennsylvania, for example, where you're based, I believe. State Senate Republicans, they advanced this measure late Thursday night to explicitly exclude a guarantee to abortion rights in the Constitution, despite the fact that the procedure is legal in the state right now. I mean, that's just the first hurdle, of course, and it will eventually go to the voters, but how worried are you that something like this could eventually pass in Pennsylvania?
Yeah, we're very worried. And this is why it's going to be so important that Democrats are really clear and unequivocal about where they stand on abortion access, and why advocacy groups and electoral organizations like ours are going to be doing a ton of voter education between now and November, but even beyond, to make sure everyone understands the stark contrast between the parties. In Pennsylvania, we have Attorney General Josh Shapiro running for governor against a literal January 6th insurrectionist, Doug Mastriano, who has been really clear about where he stands on LGBTQ issues, abortion issues, et cetera. And we have an opportunity to make sure all Pennsylvania voters understand what's coming and in the years ahead, should there be a significant shift in the legislature and statewide. I also, to the earlier question, I just have to jump in on codification of Roe. You know, it's so important to understand the House passed the Women's Health Protection Act, which codified Roe. It went to the Senate, where 49 Democrats voted for WIPA. We had one Democratic holdout. We had one Democratic holdout in the House. Not one single Republican in Congress has voted to codify Roe. That's really important, and we have to educate voters on that.
No, and I'm so glad you brought up that point, because it is absolutely important that we have to think about. Also, if you get in Republicans and you codify, if you get in Democrats and you codify this with a simple majority, you run the risk that as soon as Republicans at some point down the line get back into power, they can try to impose a national ban on abortion rights, and that would be disastrous. Yep.
They've already said they're going to do it, and we know they're going to do it. So honestly, that threat is it's sort of moot. We'd like to see them abolish the filibuster right now, frankly, and let's put pressure on Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski, who say they want to codify Roe, but won't answer the question on the filibuster.
Yeah, no, that's the point exactly I was trying to make. Maria Teresa, meanwhile, what you're seeing from states that are Democrat controlled, like New York, there's a constitutional amendment to guarantee abortion access that just passed its first hurdle here. Absent a federal law, is there anything states can do to protect reproductive rights?
Well, it's just this. Right now, we are working as if we have a quilt of certain laws that protect a woman's right and recognizes her agency. And I think we can't forget that. This is about whether or not women in the state of Texas, for example, have equal rights as a man. Clearly not if we do not have agency over our bodies. And that is what is on the ballot. When we want fair and equitable, we're not just talking about abortion care because we want it nilly-nilly. It's talking about fundamentally, who do we consider equal citizens? And do we have an opportunity for us to govern our bodies so that we can make economic decisions on what kind of family we want, when we want our family, if we want to work or not? And this is where we oftentimes fail to have a real frank discussion. Women know what is best for them. we understand our grievances. We understand what might be trying. We understand what we may or may not be able to do. And for a government to come into that, between a conversation between that and a physician, not only is it erroneous, but at the same time, it's Darkonian. It sends us back into the dark ages. And that is what's on the ballot in November, is recognizing that as a man, as an ally, they have to step up and recognize that this is about equity, making sure that we all have agency over our right to choose and our basic freedoms. I do have to say, though, what I found really striking was what the president said today, Ayman, and he went after the court in a very visible way, saying that they are not being non-judgmental. In fact, they're being an activist court. And he said that we do have to vote in November because the stakes are so high, because this is just the beginning of eroding other people's freedoms. And this is based on the analysis of Justice Thomas, who said that first they're going after Roe, but what other things can they go after? And he made an allusion to contraception, to same-sex marriage, and the list goes on.
Minnie, what do you make of state governors who support abortion rights declaring that they will not cooperate with states trying to prosecute patients who travel for abortion care? What does that mean for groups on the ground helping these women from anti-abortion states trying to get to other states? I mean, does that actually affect their work, or is it just symbolic?
You know, I think it actually has ramifications, and it's really powerful. You know, the unclear thing about all of these bans is, what is the enforcement mechanism, right? And if you have Democratic governors who are doing incredible work expanding access and protecting pregnant people and women, you know, if they aren't cooperating with the extremist governors and legislatures in other states and prosecutors, it's really, really powerful stuff. And it's what shows contrast, again, to what Democrats, when they're in power, when they're in charge, these governors are really showing clearly and starkly how they are fighting for us and how they will throw down for us in a way that, you know, Americans need to understand. And I think you combine that with what the president said today and the power of the DOJ and the Attorney General. A part of the executive order was volunteer lawyer corps, pro bono lawyers led by the AG, helping with these tricky legal issues for providers and patients. It's powerful, and it could have a really big, significant impact on access to services on the ground.
Maria Teresa, before I let you go, final thoughts on whether or not Roe versus Wade will be on the ballots. How do Democrats take the position that you were just talking about, which is that 50% of this country's rights are now being impeded, and make that a central issue to get voters out to the polls when you have Republicans beating the drums about inflation and the economy and all the other things that they use to, jack up their base?
Right. Well, the good news is that it turns out that this last quarter, Biden added 1 million jobs to individuals, and that's huge. Apparently, it's the very first time in 22 years that any president can tout that. Gas prices are down. This is a conversation that the Republicans, frankly, don't want to have. They know that the majority of Americans, including moderate Republicans and independents, don't believe that a woman should not have a right to choose. At Voto Latino, we just did a study and found that in ruby red states, Ayman, you have 68% of Latino voters believing that a woman should have a right to choose, and 81% of them believing that there should be some sort of gun reform. So they are reading the tea leaves as we are on the Republican side. Republicans don't want to have this conversation. They want it to be basically done at the legislative level. You mentioned the reason that Kansas is having a vote on abortion in the middle of August. That's their primary. They know that the majority of Kansas voters aren't even going to go out. So they're trying to do this in hushed tones because they know that even their base, many of them, don't want to make sure that women don't have access, that they do want to have freedom of their reproductive choices.